Rose Morgan had been in Arizona less than an hour when a stranger nearly ruined her only decent dress. She was standing beside a wagon on the muddy main street, one hand gathering her skirt clear of a puddle, the other wrapped around a small wooden box, when a boy darted out from between two storefronts. A young horse came thundering toward him. Rose barely had time to gasp. The rider hauled hard on the reins. The horse swerved, hooves striking brown water, and a sheet of flew straight across Rose's pale traveling dress. She stumbled backward. The wooden box slipped from her hands. No. The rider was out of the saddle before it struck the ground. He caught the box against his chest. For one breath, Rose could only stare at the box in relief. Then she looked down at her dress. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. The stranger looked first at her dress, then at the box in his hands. He was tall, perhaps a few years past 30, with black hair, a weathered face, and the maddeningly calm eyes of a man who seemed convinced the world ought to move around him. He handed her the box. Rose snatched it back. Do you always ride through town as if you own the road? His gaze moved toward the boy, now safely disappearing behind a mercantile. Only when people stand in the middle of it. Rose stared at him. A gentleman would apologize. One dark eyebrow lifted. A sensible woman would thank the man who saved her dishes. A gentleman would know better than to argue with a woman he just covered in mud. He glanced at her mud-spattered skirt. Not half. Rose's mouth fell open. Good Lord, you are worse at it than I imagined. One eyebrow lifted. We have known each other less than a minute. You imagine quickly. Less than a minute has been plenty. The faintest hint of amusement touched his face. That made it worse. I didn't ask you to save the box. His eyes dropped to it. Something in his expression changed for just an instant. Next time, he said. I'll remember that. He swung into the saddle. Rose stood there, speechless with indignation, while he touched his heels to the horse. Don't trouble yourself, she called after him. There won't be a next time. The stranger rode on. A few yards down the street, he looked back. Rose didn't see him. She was too busy inspecting the wooden box for damage and muttering several opinions about Arizona men that her mother would not have approved of. The box was unharmed. Rose pressed it against her chest. Only then did her anger soften. Inside was a small tea service that had belonged to her father. It was not expensive, but it was one of the few pieces of him she had left. A merchant back in Missouri had offered Rose only a few dollars for it. She had refused. There were some things poverty could take, and some things Rose Morgan intended to make it work harder for. Her father had died months earlier. After the funeral came the creditors. Then debts no one had known were so large. Their Missouri home was sold. Most of the furniture followed, and by the end, nearly everything Rose and her widowed mother owned could fit onto one wagon. Rose had not cried when they left. At least, not where Eleanor could see. So at 27 years old, Rose had come west with a widowed mother, a few trunks, very little money, and one conviction, hardened by grief. She would never again build her whole future upon someone else's ability to provide it. Arizona was not a dream. It was simply where they had landed. A place to find work. A place to begin again. And if the territory was filled with men, like the black-haired horseman she had just met, Rose suspected it was going to be a very long beginning. By late afternoon, she and Eleanor had settled into 2 modest rooms at a boarding house near the edge of town. Rose was attempting to remove dried mud from her dress when the landlady knocked. Miss Morgan, something came for you. For me. The woman handed her a brown paper parcel. Rose frowned. She knew almost no one in Arizona. Inside was a shawl. Simple, warm, well-made, and certainly more expensive than anything Rose would have bought for herself just then. Eleanor touched the fabric. "Well, it appears you've acquired an admirer quickly." "Mother, I only said it appears so. There must be some mistake." Rose searched the wrapping. No name, no receipt, nothing except a small folded piece of paper. She opened it. 2 words. "For the mud." Rose stared at them. Eleanor leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Rose thought of black hair, calm eyes, and a man who could insult a woman and while holding her father's tea set safely in his hands. "Nothing," she said. She folded the note. "It means absolutely nothing." But she did not throw the shawl away. Nor did she know that somewhere beyond the town, the arrogant stranger she hoped never to see again was riding toward one of the largest ranches in the county. 3 days later, Eleanor returned to the boarding house carrying the first truly good news they had received since coming west. "I found work." Rose looked up. "Where?" "A ranch outside town. The housekeeper has been called away for a few months, and they need someone to cook and manage the household until she returns." Eleanor told her the wages is. Rose blinked. "That much?" Eleanor smiled. "If I'm careful, by winter, we might even have something put aside." For the first time since Missouri, Rose allowed herself to imagine that perhaps their luck had finally turned. "What's the ranch called?" "Walker Ranch." Rose had never heard of it, and the owner. Eleanor folded the piece of paper containing the directions. "A man named Mert Walker." Rose smiled and reached for her mother's hand. Neither woman had the slightest idea that Rose had already met him. Rose thought Walker Ranch might be the first piece of good luck her family had seen in months. She could not have known that the man waiting there was the same infuriating stranger who had covered her in mud, saved her father's tea set, and somehow managed to insult her while doing it. She had already told herself there would never be a next time. Arizona, it seemed, had other plans. Before we continue, if you are enjoying the story, please subscribe and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. It costs nothing, but it means a great deal to this growing storytelling community. And now, back to Rose. Because by the following morning, reaching Walker Ranch would no longer be Eleanor's responsibility. The night before her mother was due to begin work, Rose noticed Eleanor sit down for the 3rd time in less than 10 minutes. "You're tired." "I'm 54. "Rose, I'm allowed to sit down." "You've sat down 3 times while folding one dress." Eleanor looked at the dress in her lap, and yet somehow, the dress survived. Rose smiled, but the worry remained. The next morning, Rose woke up because of the sound of her mother coughing. Eleanor was burning with fever. The town doctor ordered several days of rest and firmly forbade a long ride into the country. "I'll send word," Eleanor said weakly. Rose looked at the few coins remaining in her purse. "No, I'll go." "Rose, he hired me, and you gave him your word. That does not mean you can simply arrive and take my place." "I know. I'll explain. If he says no, I'll come home." Eleanor knew that particular look on her daughter's face. Argument was useless. By early afternoon, Rose was riding beneath a wide Arizona sky toward Walker Ranch. The property seemed to go on forever. Cattle grazed across the open range. Large stables stood beyond the corrals. And at the center rose a handsome 2-story house. Rose studied it and decided Mr. Walker was probably 60, wealthy, severe, and accustomed to frightening employees with a single look. She tied her horse and climbed the steps. The front door opened. Rose stopped. So did the man standing there. Black hair, weathered face, maddeningly calm eyes. You. Oh, no. One eyebrow lifted. That was exactly what I was thinking. For one wild moment, Rose considered getting back on her horse. Then she remembered Eleanor, lying sick at the boarding house. She straightened her shoulders. My mother is sick, so I came instead. Samuel Walker looked at her for several seconds. Rose waited. Then you rode a long way for nothing. Her temper rose instantly. You have not even asked what I can do. I hired your mother, and she became ill. I gathered that. I can cook. So, keep accounts, manage a pantry, and run a household. Samuel considered her. Can you do any of those without arguing? Rose smiled tightly. I suppose we may both have to make sacrifices. Something almost amused flickered in his eyes, but disappeared just as quickly. I'm sorry about your mother, Miss Morgan. But the answer is no. Rose had not told him her name. She noticed. Then she remembered the shawl. Before she could ask, Samuel stepped back toward the door. That was answer enough for Rose's pride. Fine. She turned, mounted, and rode away. Less than half an hour later, the Arizona sky opened. Rain hammered the road. By the time Rose reached the creek, the quiet crossing had become a churning brown current. She studied it, searching for a safer place. Hooves sounded behind her. Don't. Rose turned. Samuel sat on his horse in the rain. I can cross. No. I can manage. You can drown too. That doesn't make it a good idea. Rose glared at him. The water will fall when the rain eases, he said. Come back. I would rather not. For once. Miss Morgan. The feeling is mutual. Thunder rolled overhead. Rose looked at the water, then at Samuel. 10 minutes later, she was riding beside the last man in Arizona she wanted to be near, at the ranch. Samuel opened the door. You can stay until the water goes down. Believe me, I won't stay a minute longer. For once. We agree. Rose walked past him into the house. Neither of them knew that. Before the night was over, a single piece of pie would change that arrangement. Samuel had no intention of offering Rose supper, and Rose had too much pride to ask. Fortunately, Eleanor had packed 2 apple hand pies for the journey. Rose had eaten one on the road and saved the other. By evening, she was sitting alone at the kitchen table, breaking through the golden crust when Samuel appeared in the doorway. He looked at the pie. Rose took another bite. What's in that? Food. I can see that. Then why did you ask? Samuel frowned. Rose continued eating. A low growl came from somewhere in his direction. Rose looked up. Samuel looked toward the window, as though the sound might have come from outside. Hungry? No. Of course. She took another deliberately slow bite. Samuel lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Is there another one? No. His expression suggested this was somehow her fault. Rose looked at the remaining half in her hand, then at him. An idea occurred to her. I'll share it. Samuel's eyes narrowed. What do you want? 5 days. For what? To prove I can do the work. 3. 7. You just said 5, and then you just said 3. Samuel stared at her. Rose smiled. 5 seems reasonable. If after 5 days I'm not satisfied, you leave without an argument. If after 5 days you are not satisfied, I'll leave and never trouble your pantry again. She held out half the pie. Samuel took it. Rose waited while he ate. Well, he chewed with maddening seriousness. Too much cinnamon. The next morning, Rose found the plate clean enough to put back in the cupboard. The 5 days began. She made mistakes. first day. She rearranged several pantry supplies in a way that made perfect sense to her, and absolutely none to a ranch that received provisions in bulk. Samuel explained why. Rose folded her arms. "You're right." He turned toward her. "Would you mind saying that again? Don't get used to it." By the third day, however, Rose had found her rhythm. She inventoried supplies, organized the laundry, corrected 2 household accounts, and prepared meals that somehow continued disappearing, despite Samuel's careful criticism. What surprised her most was that he was difficult, but he was not unfair. When she made a mistake, he said so. When she did something well, he did not invent a fault simply to win. Rose also began getting to know the ranch hands. Eli Turner, a gray-haired cowboy, past 60, became her favorite. One afternoon, he admitted that his eyesight had grown too poor for writing letters. So Rose sat with him at the kitchen table and helped compose one to his daughter. Samuel came through the back door while Rose was reading it aloud. He stopped without announcing himself. Eli was spelling. So was Rose. Samuel quietly walked away. By the 4th day, the ranch hands had discovered that Rose's kitchen contained hot coffee, decent food, and someone willing to listen to their stories. The house began filling with voices it had not known for years. One evening, Samuel returned after sunset and heard Rose laughing before he opened the back door. He stood on the porch with one hand on the latch. For years, the house had known little more than footsteps, the ticking clock, and the Arizona wind against the windows. Now it sounded alive. A small smile crossed his face. Rose never saw it. On the 5th morning, Samuel came downstairs and found her traveling bag beside the door. "What's that?" "My things." "I can see that." Rose looked at him. "Then why did you ask?" Samuel seemed to regret having taught her that answer. "Our 5 days are over," she said. He looked at the bag, then toward the kitchen. "The pantry still needs organizing." Rose waited. "And the upstairs curtains need washing." Her mouth curved slightly. "Mr. Walker, are you asking me to stay?" "I'm saying there's work. For how long?" "Until your mother is well. Or Mrs. Cooper returns. You could simply say you're satisfied with me." Samuel met her eyes. "Don't push your luck." Rose picked up her bag, smiling as she carried it back upstairs. Samuel watched her go. He told himself he was relieved because finding another housekeeper would have been inconvenient. It was the first excuse he made for wanting Rose Morgan to stay. It would not be the last. A few days later, Rose discovered that Samuel Walker was considerably easier to argue with than one of his horses. The mare was called Ember, a beautiful chestnut with powerful legs and a white mark above one eye. Rose had barely stepped inside the stable when Ember pinned her ears and backed away. "Don't crowd her." Rose turned. Samuel stood behind her. "I wasn't planning to." "She'll kick if she feels cornered." Rose studied the mare. "Maybe she doesn't like being ordered around." Samuel looked from Ember to Rose. "Sounds familiar." Rose gave him a look sharp enough to cut leather, but she listened. The next afternoon, she returned alone. She did not enter Ember's stall or reach for her. She simply sat nearby, spoke softly, and left a piece of apple within reach. She did the same the following day. Eli eventually told her why Samuel had warned her. Previous owner was hard on that mare. Too hard. Rose looked toward Ember. Why did Samuel buy her? Eli shrugged. Same reason he does plenty of things he doesn't advertise. Somebody had to. The answer stayed with Rose. Then Sam Ortiz was injured while working with a frightened horse. Samuel took him to the doctor himself, paid the bill, and quietly kept his wages coming while he recovered. When Rose mentioned it that evening, Samuel barely looked up from his accounts. I don't need applause for doing what I ought to do. And then there was Willow. The old gray mare received careful feed and gentle treatment, despite being long past useful ranch work. More than once, Rose saw Samuel checking Willow himself. She belonged to someone he cared about. Eli told her. Who? Eli glanced toward Samuel, his story to tell. Rose did not ask again, but the question remained. Who had once been loved by this difficult man, enough for him to seek care for her horse? Several mornings later, Rose visited Ember again. This time the mare did not retreat. Rose remained perfectly still as Ember stepped closer, hesitated, then pressed her warm nose against Rose's open palm. Rose smiled. From behind came Samuel's voice. Well, Rose glanced over her shoulder. Don't look so surprised. Samuel considered Ember. I'm reconsidering her judgment. Rose laughed before she could stop herself. Samuel almost smiled. Almost. They still argued. They still irritated each other with remarkable efficiency. But something underneath the arguments had changed. Rose was no longer wondering what was wrong with Samuel Walker. She was beginning to wonder what had happened to him. Before she could find the answer, a trip into town would introduce Thomas Bennett. And Samuel was about to discover that Rose was not the only one capable of getting under his skin. 2 days later, Rose needed to visit Eleanor and collect more medicine from town. Samuel happened to have business there as well. We may as well ride together, he said. It's the same road. Rose was beginning to notice how often Samuel found practical reasons for things he wanted to do anyway. In town, Eleanor was recovering well. After leaving the boarding house, Rose stopped at the mercantile, where a young man stepped forward when he saw her struggling with several packages. Miss Morgan. Thomas Bennett had met Rose briefly during her first days in town. He was pleasant, well-dressed, and possessed the useful ability to speak to a woman without irritating her within 30 seconds. He carried her parcels, asked sincerely about Eleanor, and made Rose laugh twice before Samuel returned from his business. Samuel stopped when he saw them. Thomas was holding Rose's packages. Rose was smiling. Samuel seemed to dislike both facts. Rose, Thomas said, when your mother is feeling stronger, perhaps I might call on you. Before Rose could answer, Samuel spoke. We should go. She turned. We, the horses. Rose glanced toward them. Are the horses in a hurry? Samuel's expression did not change. Thomas hid a smile. The ride home was unusually quiet. Rose assumed Samuel was annoyed because she kept him waiting. She pulled shawl more tightly around her shoulders as the evening air cooled. Samuel glanced at it. You kept it. Rose turned. Kept what? Too late. Samuel looked straight ahead. Rose touched the shawl. You sent this. You looked cold, it said. For the mud. That too. For once. Rose had no clever reply. The apology she thought he had been too proud to give had been wrapped around her shoulders all along. A few days later, Rose found herself on the opposite side of the same discomfort. Margaret Hale arrived at the ranch on family business. She was elegant, confident, and clearly had known Samuel for years. Worse, she made him smile. Rose discovered she disliked Samuel's smile considerably less when she was the one causing it. That evening, she set his dinner plate down harder than necessary. Samuel looked at it. Did the plate offend you? No. You seem angry. I'm perfectly happy. That explains the plate. Rose gave him a cold look. Samuel suddenly understood. Naturally. This made him worse. Margaret thinks I should visit more often. Then perhaps you should. Perhaps I will. Wonderful. Wonderful. They ate in silence. Rose told herself she did not care about Margaret Hale. Samuel told himself Thomas Bennett simply talked too much. Neither was particularly convincing. What had begun as irritation was becoming something warmer, more dangerous, and much harder to dismiss. Then the weather turned. A storm began gathering over the Arizona hills, and before it broke, one frightened horse slipped away from the ranch. Rose went after it alone. By the time Samuel learned she had not returned, every trace of his usual calm was gone. The missing horse was young, nervous, and frightened by the thunder rolling across the distant hills. Rose saw its tracks leading away from the ranch and made the decision before anyone could stop her. She had enough time, she thought. She could manage. She always could. But Arizona weather had little respect for confidence. Rose found the horse near a ravine, just as the rain began. While leading it back, her boot slipped on wet ground, and she twisted her ankle badly enough to make every step painful. By then, the sky had turned nearly black. At the ranch, Samuel came in from the range and immediately noticed her absence. "Where's Rose?" Eli looked toward the hills. "Went after that young gelding." Samuel's face changed. "How long ago?" When Eli answered, "South was already moving." He rode us into the storm. Rain struck hard enough to blur the land. Samuel followed what tracks remained until he found Rose's horse, standing alone beneath a cottonwood. But no Rose. For several terrible seconds, Samuel could hear nothing except rain and his own breathing. His father had been there one day, and gone the next. Then his mother. Then Rebecca. People disappeared. People died. And somehow Samuel was always the one left standing afterward. Rose. No answer. He rode farther. Rose. This time, faintly through the rain. He heard her. Over here he found her beneath a tree, soaked through, one hand holding the missing horse's lead rope. Samuel was out of the saddle almost before his horse stopped. Rose saw his expression and raised a hand. "Before you say anything." He pulled her into his arms. Rose froze. So did Samuel. It lasted only a moment. But there was nothing careful about it. He had simply needed to feel that she was there, warm and breathing. Then he released her, and fear turned quickly into anger. What were you thinking? The horse was heading toward the ravine, and it could have died. Samuel stared at her. And what exactly was I supposed to do if you died with it? The rain seemed suddenly quieter. Rose looked at him. Samuel looked away first. The creek had risen too high to risk returning to the ranch. So Samuel led them to a small line cabin used by ranch hands. Inside, he built a fire while Rose sat on the narrow bunk, trying unsuccessfully to hide the pain in her ankle. "Let me see it." "It's fine." "Rose, I can manage." Samuel crouched in front of her. "I know." She stopped. His voice softened. "You don't have to." Something about those 4 words reached deeper than Rose expected. Samuel was not telling her she was helpless. He was telling her she did not have to prove she wasn't. She let him examine her ankle. Later, with the storm beating against the roof and a small fire between them, Rose noticed how gently Samuel had wrapped his coat around her shoulders. Her thoughts returned to Willow. Who did she belong to? Samuel knew immediately whom she meant. For a long time, he watched the flames. Her name was Rebecca. Rose said nothing. "I was going to marry her." Samuel told the story quietly. He had bought a ring, but never given it to her. Rebecca became ill before he found the right moment. By the time he understood, there would never be a right moment. There was no time left. His parents had died years earlier. Rebecca had been the last person Samuel allowed himself to believe might stay. After a while, he said. You stop asking people to. Rose looked at him. Because they might leave. Samuel's eyes remained on the fire. Because they always do. Rose finally understood the loneliness in that enormous house. The distance. The silence. Even the kindness he preferred no one to notice. That doesn't mean they regretted loving you. Samuel looked at her then. Neither spoke. The fire cracked softly between them. Samuel's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then returned to her eyes. He leaned closer. Rose did not move away. For one breath. She thought he would kiss her. For one breath. She wanted him to. That frightened her more than the storm. Rose turned her face toward the fire. Samuel stopped. Neither apologized. By morning, the rain had passed and sunlight stretched across the wet Arizona hills. They rode back to Walker Ranch side by side, speaking very little. The storm was over. The trouble between them was only beginning. By the time Rose and Samuel returned to the ranch, Eli needed only one look at them to know something had changed. The following morning, Rose entered the kitchen just as Samuel reached for the coffee. Good morning, Miss Morgan. Good morning, Mr. Walker. Eli slowly lowered his cup. Rose became very interested in the bread. Samuel became equally interested in the coffee. Eli looked from one to the other. I liked it better when you two were fighting. Rose nearly dropped the knife. Samuel walked out. The storm had passed, but the strange tension from the cabin remained. Their arguments became fewer. Their silences became longer. If their hands touched while passing something across the table, both noticed. If Samuel was gone longer than expected, Rose found herself listening for his horse, and whenever Samuel returned, his eyes searched for her before he seemed aware they were doing it. One evening, he entered the kitchen and stopped. Rose was not there. Her cup was missing from the table. No humming came from the pantry. No voice was arguing with Eli beyond the back door. The room was exactly as it had been before she arrived. Samuel hated it. That was when the truth finally became impossible to avoid. His days had begun to divide themselves into the hours Rose was there and the hours she was not. The realization did not comfort him. It frightened him. So Samuel did what he had always done when words failed him. He tried to show her. By then, Ember trusted Rose enough to approach whenever she entered the stable. One afternoon, Samuel found Rose brushing the mare and stood beside the stall. She's yours. Rose stopped. What? Ember. She stared at him. Why? There were a dozen things Samuel should have said, because Ember trusted her, because he trusted her, because giving Rose something he valued felt dangerously close to giving her a piece of himself. Instead, he said the worst possible thing. You need a better horse. Rose's expression changed. I don't need you buying things for me. That isn't what I meant. I can provide for myself. Not everything someone gives you is charity, and not everyone with less money than you needs fixing. Samuel went still. Rose immediately knew she had hurt him. But pride arrived before apology. I can't accept her. She walked away. Samuel remained beside Ember, discovering that caring deeply for a woman did not make him any better at speaking to one. Several days later, Margaret Hale visited again. Rose found herself beside her on the porch while Samuel spoke with two ranch hands across the yard. You and Mr. Walker seem very close, Rose said, attempting to sound casual. Margaret glanced at her. Samuel. Mr. Walker. A knowing smile appeared. That's serious. Is it? Rose flushed. I don't know what you mean. Of course not. Margaret spared her further embarrassment. There was a time I thought Samuel and I might become something more. Rose felt an immediate, unreasonable ache in her chest. Margaret continued. I stopped waiting years ago. Why? Margaret looked across the yard. Samuel was listening to one of the men. Then, almost unconsciously, his gaze wandered toward the house. He found Rose and stayed there. Margaret saw it too. Because he never looked at me the way he looks at you. Rose could not answer. For weeks, she had found explanations for every small kindness, every lingering glance, every unnecessary reason Samuel invented to keep her near. Suddenly, those explanations felt very thin. The possibility that Samuel Walker might love her should have made Rose happy. Instead, it frightened her almost as much as the realization that she might love him too. A few days later, Samuel asked Rose to ride with him to check a distant fence line. By late afternoon, they stopped on a ridge overlooking Walker Ranch. The house stood below them, small against the enormous Arizona landscape. Cattle moved like dark specks across the grass, and sunlight lay golden over the corrals. Samuel told her where his father had first built a cabin and how the ranch had grown piece by piece. Rose spoke about Eleanor, who was recovering quickly now. For once, neither argued. The silence between them had changed. It no longer demanded to be filled. Rose looked down at the house she had entered, only because a flooded creek had forced her back. She had arrived wanting to leave. Now one thought frightened her. I don't want to leave. Not because of the wages, not because Eleanor needed the work, because of Samuel. She turned toward him and found him already looking at her. For a moment, something seemed ready to be said. Neither said it. When they returned, a letter was waiting. Rose recognized Eleanor's handwriting and opened it immediately. She's well. Relief brightened her face. Samuel smiled. That is good news. It is. Then Rose continued reading. Her smile faded. Mrs. Cooper was returning the following week. Rose raised her eyes. Samuel understood without asking. 1 week. That was all they had left. Rose expected something to change after that. She hoped Samuel might finally say what neither of them had been willing to say on the ridge. Instead, he began disappearing. He spent longer hours with the cattle. He returned after supper. When they were together, his manner became careful and distant. Rose felt the old wall rising again. What she could not know was that Samuel was trying to teach himself how to live without her before she was gone. Ice had made the mistake of needing people before. His parents, Rebecca, now Rose. People left. Better to loosen his grip before life tore them away. But Rose did not see fear. She saw rejection. 2 evenings before Mrs. Cooper's return, she found Samuel alone at the dining table. My mother wrote something else. Samuel looked up. She says there may be work for me in Tusi Susan. His hand stopped over the ledger. Rose waited. She had given him a door. All he had to do was walk through it. Samuel imagined Rose leaving for Tucson. Then he imagined asking her to stay, loving her openly, depending on tomorrow, as though tomorrow had ever promised him anything. Rebecca's face came back to him. The funeral, the ring never given. His eyes dropped to the ledger. That sounds like a good opportunity. Rose stood very still. Yes, she said quietly. It does. She left the room. Samuel closed his eyes. Neither slept well that night. Miss Cooper returned 2 days later, cheerful and grateful to find the household in such good order. Rose packed her belongings. Samuel paid every dollar she was owed and added extra. Rose pushed the additional money back across the desk. I earned the wages, Cecil, not this. He looked at her, then took it back. No argument. Somehow, that hurt more. On the porch, Rose's traveling bag rested beside her feet. It reminded Samuel of the fifth morning, when he had seen the same bag, and immediately invented reasons for her to carry it upstairs again. The pantry, the curtains, the work. This time, he had no excuse left. Rose waited. Samuel could have said her name. He could have asked her to stay. Instead, he said, "You've done what you came here to do." Rose looked at him for a long moment. "I suppose I have." She mounted her horse. Samuel remained on the porch as she rode away. The road was dry today. No storm blocked her path. No flooded creek forced her back. There was nothing to make Rose leave, and nothing to make her stay. Only two people who wanted the same thing, and were too afraid to ask for it. Samuel watched until she disappeared. The next morning, his house would be clean, orderly, and perfectly managed, and for the first time, Samuel would understand how empty perfection could feel. Miss Cooper was an excellent housekeeper. Breakfast was served on time. The coffee was exactly as Samuel liked it. The pantry was orderly, the laundry properly done, and not a single thing in the house gave him reason to complain. Samuel barely touched his breakfast. Eli glanced at the plate. "Food all right, boss, fine, funny." Samuel looked up. "What?" Eli shrugged. "You complained more when it was good." Samuel gave him a look and left the table. Later, Samuel passed the back porch and stopped. There was no laughter from the kitchen, no voice arguing with Eli. At the stable, Ember stood near the fence, watching the road. Samuel rested his arms beside her, and for several minutes, two stubborn creatures stared in the same direction. In town, Rose returned to Eleanor and tried very hard to sound relieved. He was impossible. Of course, arrogant. Certainly, always complaining. Terrible man. Rose fell silent. Eleanor looked at her daughter, staring through the window, and wisely said nothing more. Rose did not wait for Samuel. She had promised herself long ago that her future would never depend entirely upon a man. And heartbreak did not change that promise. The Tucson opportunity was real. She began preparing to leave. Thomas helped arrange transportation and made inquiries about lodging. 2 days later, Samuel found an excuse to ride into town. Rose had left behind a small household ledger. It was a poor excuse. Eleanor knew it immediately. She accepted the ledger and looked at him. "Did you ask her to stay?" Samuel was silent. "No." Eleanor nodded. "Then perhaps she didn't leave you." "Mr. Walker." His eyes lifted. "Perhaps you let her go." His parents had died. Rebecca had died. Those losses had taught him that everyone he loved would eventually be taken from him. But Rose had not been taken. She had stood in front of him. She had mentioned Tucson. She had waited. And Samuel had chosen silence. This time, no one had abandoned him. He had created the abandonment himself. Samuel turned toward the door. Minutes later, he was on his horse. For once, he would not wait for someone to come to him. He would go after her. Then he reached the end of the street and saw Thomas beside Rose, loading her luggage onto a wagon. Samuel pulled his horse to a stop. For one terrible moment, he thought he was already too late. Thomas stood beside Rose, lifting one of her bags onto the wagon. Rose said something Samuel could not hear, and Thomas smiled. The old instinct rose immediately. Leave before she can choose someone else. Samuel turned his horse. He rode several yards before pulling the reins. For years, he had called retreat wisdom. He had convinced himself that expecting loss made it hurt less when it came. With Rose, he had done something worse. He had made her decision for her because he was afraid of hearing it. Maybe she would choose Tucson. Maybe she would choose Thomas. Maybe she would simply choose a life without Samuel Walker. But the choice belonged to Rose. Samuel turned his horse around. Rose. She looked up. He dismounted and walked toward her. Thomas looked between them, understood more quickly than either probably wished, and quietly moved away. Rose folded her arms. What are you doing here? Samuel had used excuses for weeks. The pantry, the curtains, the horses, the road, the work. He had none left. I lied. Rose frowned. About what? The stew. She stared at him. What? It wasn't too salty, say. Cloyal. The biscuits weren't too soft either. Rose's expression began to change. And the coffee was never too strong. Have you ridden all the way into town to confess your opinions about breakfast? No. Samuel stepped closer. And that first pie? Rose waited. Samuel took a breath. Best thing I'd eaten in years. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. I knew it. No, you didn't. I saw the plate. That proved nothing. You nearly washed it with your tongue. Samuel almost smiled. Then his expression became serious. I kept finding reasons for you to stay. Rose's smile faded. The pantry. The curtains. Your mother needing time to recover. I told myself I needed the help. He swallowed. But I was afraid to tell you the real reason. Rose's voice softened. What was the real reason? Samuel looked directly at her. You. The street seemed to grow quiet around them. I love you, Rose. Her eyes filled. But she did not look away. I don't love you because you can cook or keep a house. I don't need someone to take care of me. I want you there because when you're gone, that house is just walls and furniture again. Rose had waited to hear those words, but love did not erase what had happened. And the next time you're afraid. Samuel was silent. If I stay, she continued, and someday that fear comes back, will you decide for me again? I'll probably still be afraid. Rose had not expected that. Samuel moved closer. But I won't decide for you again. I should have asked what you wanted. I should have trusted you enough to answer. His voice lowered. I'm not asking you to need me. Rose? Her breath caught. I'm asking you to choose me. For most of her life, security had meant depending on someone else. After Missouri, Rose had sworn never to make that mistake again. But Samuel was not asking her to surrender her independence. He was asking her to bring it with her. Rose stepped toward him. I was hoping you'd ask. Then she kissed him. It was not hurried. There was no storm, no fear, no flooded creek forcing them together. This time, both of them were exactly where they had chosen to be. When they parted, Samuel rested his forehead briefly against hers. I brought something else. Rose laughed softly. Should I be worried? Probably. He led her toward his horse. Ember was tied behind it. Rose stopped. April. She's yours, I told you. I know. He placed the reins in Rose's hand but did not release them yet. She still chooses who she trusts. Rose looked at Ember, then back at him. And she chose you. This time Rose understood. The gift had never been about what she could afford. It was about trust. She closed her fingers around the reins. Samuel let go. A short while later, they left town together, riding toward Walker Ranch beneath the open Arizona sky. The first time Rose had traveled that road, she had gone alone to keep her mother's promise. This time, she was going back for a promise of her own. 1 year later, Walker Ranch looked much the same beneath the Arizona sun. The cattle still wandered the open range. Eli still complained about his back and refused every suggestion that he rest. Willow had grown older, but Samuel still checked on her himself. And Ember now followed Rose, with the quiet loyalty of a horse that had made her choice. The house had changed too, not because of new furniture or finer curtains, because of the sounds inside it. Eleanor's laughter when she visited, Eli arguing from the kitchen, Rose calling after her husband when he walked through the door with dusty boots. Samuel, wipe your boots. Samuel looked down, then at his wife. Yes, ma'am. Rose narrowed her eyes. Samuel wisely went back and wiped them. Later, Rose placed a warm apple pie before him. Samuel took a bite. Well, she asked. He chewed with great seriousness. Too much cinnamon. Rose stared at him. Samuel reached for a second piece. The kitchen towel struck him squarely in the shoulder. For once, he laughed without trying to hide it. Eleanor watched them from the table and feel, funny thing, she said. I was the one who was supposed to come to this ranch. Samuel looked at Rose. A year earlier, she had stood on his porch and said, my mother is sick, so I came instead. He had told her she had ridden a long way for nothing. He had been wrong. Samuel took Rose's hand. No, ma'am, he said. I think you sent the right one. Outside the window, Ember stood beside the while Willow rested beneath a cottonwood. Samuel had once believed loving someone meant waiting to lose them. Rose had believed needing someone meant surrendering the right to choose her own life. Neither belief had saved them from loneliness. Love offered no promise against loss. It simply asked whether fear was reason enough to keep the door closed. Samuel had finally opened his, and Rose, entirely free to leave, had chosen to come home.